This is Ed calling in from DC. Ed, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Hey, great. Hey, thanks for letting me on. Hey, so my name's Ed. I've got a new book coming out that is, I think you guys might find interesting. You especially, Dr. Josh. It's called A History of the Goddess, and I went through the Bible and I tracked all the references to goddesses, Asherah and Astarte, and I figured out what the story was being told, and sort of put it in a historical perspective and sort of the almost a theological perspective too, like who is the wife of God. So I'm curious how much you know. I mean, Dr. Josh, I know you're a real scholar, so I'm curious how much you know about Asherah and Astarte and what your take is on those characters in the Bible.
I mean, that's a pretty general question. So I'm not an expert on Astarte or Asherah. So I guess for those that are listening that might not be familiar, there's an awful lot in the biblical text in the canonical form of the Bible that talks about how there's an Asherah pole, for example, that is used as a site of worship, sort of as a symbol for the goddess. And, people like Josiah or, the kings are told, the people are told to remove all of these symbols of, these deities that are brought alongside Yahweh. But of course, we see in other places, and just Israelite religion in general, you see, Asherah being alongside Yahweh as like a consort. And so Ted Lewis is a professor up at Johns Hopkins, and he's just come out with a book last year. It's like 1,089 pages. It's sort of his magnum opus on Israelite religion, and the title is escaping me at the moment. But he goes into great depth in one of his chapters, I think, on the goddess. Also, Mark Smith has written extensively on this. And I'm, sure you've read those things if you've written on this. But I have no particular expertise in, saying more than I've said about it, unless there's something specific.
No, so basically, I mean, I grew up going to church and went to Catholic high school. So, I mean, I was educated on the Bible, but I'd never even heard of these characters. And I hear these archaeologists and scholars saying this is the wife of God. So I figured, that seems like an interesting theological question. And so I dug into who these characters were. And so basically I went through the neighboring mythology all the way back to Sumer and tracked it all the way back through into the Ice Age, to the Venus figurines of the Ice Age, and tracked the archaeology and mythology all the way through. And what I figured out was that, there's a repeating pattern of motifs and a real pattern of traditions that we see there. It's all Earth Mother. The Earth Mother and the Heavenly Father were the original gods, and they were the parents of all the other gods. Testament effectively tells the story of their divorce. And so it's this divorce is what's going on. And so what I figured out was that the early Hebrews are pagan, and they're worshiping El, the Heavenly Father of the Canaanite pantheon, and they're worshiping the entire Canaanite pantheon. Baal is the son of El. He's the king of the gods. He's like Zeus. Asherah is the wife of God. She's the mother goddess. Astarte is the maiden. She's their daughter. She's the queen of heaven. She's the most popular one. She's the goddess of love and war, and she's like Ishtar of Babylon. And she's the most popular goddess. And then there's a third one, Anat, who's the blood-soaked goddess of vengeance, who's not mentioned, but she's the consort of Baal, and her favorite activity is slaughtering the enemies of Baal. And so the Hebrew writers just leave her out of it. And then what you see in this culture war is that in shutting down these temples, it tracks the same culture wars we're fighting today. That all these things that the social progressives are fighting about, feminism, environmentalism, sex and drugs, gays and transgender people were the high priests. They're all there. It's all there in the Old Testament. The Kadesha are the sacred temple priestesses, but they're just called cult prostitutes. They don't give them any respect or credit, but actually in the ancient world, they were really important.
Does this match up with your expertise, Dr. Josh?
I mean, religion in and of itself is incredibly complex, and there are things that you can track, back through time that have correlation as you go through. So certainly there's similarities in Inanna, Ishtar figure, and then coming into the Canaanite goddess, the different goddesses that you see. And there's similarities between them. There's no question about it. And I think that's absolutely true, that the Hebrew Bible is reacting very strongly to the polytheism that was ancient Israelite religion.
Yeah.
So
just to give some context, because I don't think a lot of people really know this. I was actually talking about this with somebody this week, actually, that the ancient Canaanite people, that is the people that the ancient Hebrew people would have been related to, we're pagan in the sense that they worshipped like many gods. Like there is a long history of poly god worship in these cultures and stuff. And that what you're talking about, Dr. Josh, is the Bible is a response to that culture at the time. And there's the Bible is littered with references to this. But like the way that we interpret Christianity and the way that we interpret our history has to say, well, these people always worshiped one God, because that really wouldn't make sense if from the very beginning there was God and he was there, and then like they just picked up these other gods that were real, because under the Christian lens, there can only be one God. But that wasn't necessarily the lens of these ancient Canaanite people, that they actually saw Yahweh as one of many gods, and that was kind of like a god of their nation. Am I portraying an accurate picture here?
Yeah. I mean, so a good chapter that I think, or a common chapter that people go to, is Deuteronomy 32. So if you look at, a passage like Deuteronomy 32, you have El, you have Yahweh, you have the other deities that are set over the nations, the individual nations. And there's, always this debate about whether El and Yahweh in that passage, is that supposed to be the same God? Is it two gods? Mm-hmm. But the point here is that the Hebrew Bible in and of itself, while it's not a unified text and it doesn't have like this unified message necessarily, one of the things that we see is that it's monotheism is rather late in its development. Again, this is not my area of specialization in the field. Again, I would point everybody to Mark Smith and to Ted Lewis as good people to read on that. But it's rather late to see monotheism develop. Early on, there's the recognition very clearly that there are many deities. It's just that, when you read through, for example, the priestly creation account in Genesis 1, there are so many motifs that are brought in from Egyptian creation stories, Mesopotamian creation stories. You see things from Ugaritic, from the Canaanite, deities, and they're being used in a way not so much to say that there's only one God, but that Yahweh is that Israel's God is the supreme deity, and he's even more supreme than what these other deities were in their creation account. So it's very complex. I mean, there's no question about it. Quite an undertaking, to go through. Even just looking at female deities. Megan wrote her master's thesis on Inanna Ishtar, so she'd actually be somebody interesting to talk to about that. But it's complicated. It's complicated.
Because this is interesting to me, because when I first read about this, I thought this was BS. I thought this was because like there's tons of like Bible, this is the real origins of the Bible kind of stories out there and stuff. And the more I read about this, I was like, no, wait, actually, there's like a huge amount of like academic people writing about this topic, that the origins of Judaism is polytheistic in nature, which is like a really, 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 really big deal if you are basing, your idea of what this religion is based on the traditional Christian lens, which says that it's it started monotheistic and then it got polytheistic, right? Because like the people kind of fell away and turned to other gods, but really it's like the opposite. It started polytheistic and then turned monotheistic over time, which I mean, to me has huge implications for the religion, but like it was just something I had never, ever encountered until I started reading books on this and like talking to people about it. But it's not something you ever hear in a church. It's not something that ever really comes up in that. So it's really fascinating. I think it's really interesting. Ed, I hope your book is cool. Maybe you should send one to the ACA if you get the chance, so I can get to take a look at it. Anything else you want to ask before we wrap up this particular call?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I'll be happy to send you guys a copy. And Dr. Josh will definitely try and get in touch with you for sure. But yeah, it's absolutely that my position is that it starts out polytheistic and that it's actually Moses that introduces monotheism and the new name Yahweh, and that Yahweh was a replacement name for El to introduce monotheism. And at that point, it launches a culture war where they have to shut down the rival temples because monotheism requires that all the other temples be closed, and that was very unpopular, and that they fight that out over the entire period of the First Temple, for the entire history of the First Temple. Interesting.
Something to look into for sure. Thanks again, Ed, for calling in on that. I don't know if he gave a lot of historical narrative there. A lot of it was that some of that was kind of new to me. I don't know that I would entirely agree with. I'd have to see where he'd get his sources on. For example, talking about the culture wars stuff. I know there's been a lot of revisionism and I mean historical revisionism in the academic sense, where they're trying to get a more accurate sense of history. Where LGBT peoples fit in like the historical narrative and stuff. A lot of people make the argument that, the Bible is actually talking more or making reference to these people having different sexual orientations and stuff. Obviously they didn't have the terminology that we use today and stuff. And, I've heard that kind of stuff. So the rest of that stuff, I'm not sure of, to be honest with you. I don't know. I was waiting for you to chime in because I knew that you would be the one that would be the person to say whether or not you believe in that. But,
yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think to get into some of the details of some of those things would take up more time than maybe we would want to on a show like this. So
maybe so, and that's why you should go to. And I messed up the channel name earlier. It's Digital Hammurabi. I said Hammurabi.
It's all the same.
But that's why they pay you the big bucks, and I'm just a guy with a microphone.